So what I want you to do is imagine a way that these words make sense to you and try to put aside the ways that they might be alien. So why do the nations, why do the people cause trouble? For me, it's why is the world in chaos, right? Why is the world in chaos? Amim Yegurik, and the peoples, I don't read it necessarily only as the nationalist psalm that it probably was in its original meaning, but rather in a more religious, spiritual meaning of why do the peoples, why is there chaos? Why are people so upset? Why are the peoples focused on, as I talked about, if we think of mitzvah and the psalmist wants us to seek holiness in the world, with those, if the goal of a spiritual life is to increase holiness and the negative actions in life is decreasing holiness, the psalmist is using language that's 2,500 years old to say exactly this. So I'm going to read this psalm through a little bit differently, and we're going to look at some of the different translations we have to see that. So if we say Lama Ragshu Goyim, it's a phrase that gets used all the time by the rabbis. Why is the world in chaos? And why are people focused on things that are finite rather than things that are infinite? The word rik or rake in Hebrew, meaning empty, to me often means that sense of vain, or why are people focused on things that are not the important things, but rather the things that are ephemeral rather than things that are infinite? And this is a common tension in the Psalms. What is it about us as human beings that gets us off track, that distracts us from focusing on the things in the world which are infinite and have lasting value and will be forever? But somehow as human beings, we're drawn over and over again to things which are pass like the wind, or like in the first Psalm, like chaff in the wind, which will disappear. The Psalms as a whole are focused on this question. And we'll see it in all different kinds of ways. We've already seen it in Psalm 1, and we see it in Psalm 2. The human nature, for some reason, wants to get distracted from the things that are infinite, holy, sacred, long-lasting, long-term. And for some reason, we have an appetite toward the finite, towards the ephemeral, towards the instant gratification tendency that we have. We want instant gratification in everything, not only in food, fast food, but in religion and in philosophy. We want what's relevant, what's meaningful now. We don't want to work hard and say, wow, to understand what's meaningful isn't necessarily something you can grasp quickly. And for those of you who are musicians or athletes or have achieved some depth in whatever field in which you have some measure of success, you know that to get to any level of understanding in whatever field you're talking about, whether it's art or music or math or science or literature, it's not something that happens quickly on the surface. And it takes a lot of tedious energy to get to where there's actual depth. And this is...
I have a hand up. Leah has raised her hand.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Go ahead.
It's okay. Let's unmute Leah. All right, Leah, go ahead. Your question.
No, that just turned up. I don't have a question.
Oh, okay.
See, it's the equivalent of scratching your head and the teacher thinking you have your hand up. But why don't I pause there, Harold? This is not a bad point to pause.
Great.
And see if there are thoughts or reactions or questions about that. And thank you again to our TA for today, Harold Levine. And again, I'm not seeing the chat, so Harold will look at it, and if there's something there. And does everybody know how to raise your hand on the chat, or on the, where is it, on the reactions? Or somewhere there's a place to raise your hand. Harold, where is it down there that you can raise your hand?
It's in participants.
Oh yes, if you click on the where it says participants, there's a place that says raise hand.
Yeah, I actually had a question.
Good, go ahead.
It almost sounded psychological, what you were just talking about, like impulses, like driving, primitive, animalistic.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because if you remember in the last couple of weeks, I can't remember when, we have a vocabulary that we think of as just the truth. We don't realize on some level that the vocabulary we have in the modern period is as much of our time as the religious language was of 2,500 years ago. Our truth is psychological truth, right? That's the way we describe everything. And by having that insight, Gail, you can then understand when we're trying to parse out the meaning of this religious text of 2,500 years ago. They didn't have psychology. They had a religious language that was the lens through which they saw everything. We, even those of us who are not trained in psychology, we see everything because psychology is the language of the 20th century. I think it's not yet clear what the language will be of the 21st century. But the 20th century, for sure, the language of insight, even that word, right? The language of understanding how the world is organized is psychological. You know, a Marxist would say the lens through which you have to understand the whole world is material. But the 20th century, I think Freud won in that he set a framework, not necessarily everything's Freudian, but he set a framework that we can understand the human being best through this lens of psychological insight. And that's why we often use psychological insight to understand a psalmist, because that's the language that's accessible to us. But I bet you in 1,000 years, people are going to read our stuff and say, what is this psychology? But hopefully there'll be teachers then who will say, that was the language that they were using, but what was the deep human truth they were seeking? And that's what we have to do. And that's what I'm going to try and be doing in our many weeks together. Is this week 3? This is our start of our 3rd week studying? Is that question of, so the psalmist is using an ancient language, and some people don't have the patience for it, which I understand, because it takes some work to get underneath the patience, underneath the thousands of years. But I find it thrilling to pick up something that we know is we're accessing a world of 2,000, 2,500 years ago, and we're in dialogue, we're connected to our people. It's a very profound thing to study text this closely and to try and get at what human, what spiritual, what divine truth were they leaving for us as kind of fossils, maybe as little markers for us to pick up that will enrich our lives today.
Rabbi Jeffrey Weiss has his hand up if you have time for one more person.
Sure, absolutely.
Jeffrey?
This because I may be saying something a little bit controversial.
We love controversy.
I'm having a lot of problems with this psalm because it sounds like it justifies dictatorship. In fact, what keeps going on my mind is what Karl Marx said, religion is the opening of the masses, and I think this is what he meant.
Well, see, that's the lens through which you see everything, which is fair. So I think this is, and again, as I've said, and I'll keep saying, that's why we have to go dig deeper, because I don't think Karl Marx understood religion. I think he was limited by his lens, and he wasn't wrong that there are ways that religion has gotten used in some circumstances is absolutely dictatorial, authoritarian, fascist. There's no question that religion can be used that way. But honestly, every system can be used that way, right? Every system, whether it's socialist or capitalist or any system can be fascist. It's not like the religion is the only one which has gone in that direction. So I'm asking another question, which is a little hard to say, which is, okay, yes, we know that fascists can use this language to serve the purpose of oppression, but I don't think that was what the intention was. And I'm not only an originalist, I want to understand the language, but these are profound religious texts about meaning and purpose. So that's why I think this psalm, and I actually think the psalmist is doing exactly the opposite. But again, that's my opinion, and you're totally welcome to yours. So in other words, I think the psalmist is setting up Hashem or the power in the universe that is bigger and broader than human kings, and setting it against what human kings do. So I think the psalm is ultimately saying, and let's go through, it's saying, why do the peoples get all in chaos and are focused on things that are worthless or empty or meaningless or ephemeral? So then the psalm goes on, Yitatzvu malchei eretz, or eretz. Why do they, and the focus is on the kings of the earth, malchei eretz. In other words, why do human rulers and why does human aristocracy do everything in their power against Yud He Vav He? In other words, against that which is holy, that which is the opposite of empty, that which is forever, that which is ineffable. Everybody should mute yourself, and then when you have a question, we can unmute you. So I think the psalm is saying exactly the opposite. If Yud He Vav He is the holiness which has created all of our souls, Malchei Eretz, the human rulers, human presidents, human dictators are functioning against that which is holy. V'al Mashicho. So on the one that has been anointed. So in other words, those who are following in the path of the holy, of the sacred, of that which is eternal, are being attacked by those who care only about power in this world. Okay, so let's keep going through. So what do the earthly rulers, dictators say? So in other words, Malchei Eretz, think of the phrase Malchei Eretz and meaning Viktor Orban or Donald Trump or Pharaoh or Adolf Hitler. Like, think just for now, for the reading of the psalm, imagining Malchei Eretz, meaning the rulers of this earth, being all the bad rulers in your head, okay? And just for my sake, for this reading, just like it's like playing with a new way of reading something. At the end, you don't have to agree with me. For sure, there's many ways of doing that. But just imagine when the phrase Malchei Eretz, human rulers, is used, what the psalmist is saying, those who abuse their power. In other words, those who are doing bad things as human rulers. And when Yud He Vav He is being used, it doesn't mean the rabbis. It doesn't mean, the head of the Jewish community. It means those who are following the holiness of the universe, as opposed to following that which is finite. Like when we talk about idol worship, that doesn't mean people who observe different religions in the way that I read the text. It means people who are following things which are finite as opposed to things which are infinite. Marcia Melnick, do you remember when we worked on this translation for the 10 Commandments in the Siddur? Marcia was our editor for the CBST Siddur, Oy Gewalt. Marcia defines her life as before the book and after the book, because it was a torturous experience, but now we all get to love this book. But we spent a long time in talking about how to do the translation for the 10 Commandments and talking about
True, Rabbi, it was not. It was a gift and a blessing in my life when it was done.
Marcia is responsible for the CBST Siddur. It really would not be here without her. But that was the whole question of the translation being infinite.
Hardly true.
Luckily, I can mute you, Marcia, and I can say whatever I want to say. It is true. Don't listen to her. Anyway, so
We'll fight it out later.
We'll fight it out later. Excellent. So let's read the psalm that way for now, okay? So let's try this, Jeffrey. You hanging with me? Just try it out. Try it on like like you're trying on a tuxedo, even though you don't usually wear a tuxedo. See how it feels. So, so the bad people, so to speak, I'm just trying to get you to change the perspective. So dictators of the world will say, let us remove their bands and cast away from us their cords. And we looked at the translation last week. So bands and does Dean want to say something, Harold? I see there's a comment there.
No.
Okay. So let's say the dictators of the world are saying, let's not be influenced by those who are saying we should give $15, there should be a $15 minimum wage to everybody. let's ignore people who are saying we should care about climate change and we should care about people on the border. Let's ignore people who are saying we should worry about how the most vulnerable amongst us are treated, okay? Let's pretend that's what that's saying. By saying the cords, the bands that, and cast away the cords, meaning the things that limit our power. The rulers of the earth are saying, let's get rid of the stuff that's limiting our power, okay? Which is to do whatever they want to do. Yoshev b'shamayim yizchak, the one who sits in heaven. So now shamayim, which is heavens, is contrasted with what word, which are often used together throughout the entire Bible. We say Oseh shamayim va'aretz, the maker of heaven and earth, is the one who has made it all. So shamayim is often either in contrast or relationship to aretz. Where else do we see the word eretz used in this psalm? Who are the kings of the earth? There are the kings of the earth, in other words, the rulers of this plane of humanity, but then there's also the one who is above all of this and sees the big picture. Somebody might notice that sometimes I say in the phrase, Oseh shamayim va'aretz, but here the word is eretz. Any of you Hebrew grammar people, or if you've never noticed that before, the noun in Hebrew is eretz, which is and that's called a segolet noun in Hebrew. It means there are two segols in a row like that. But and I'm just throwing this out for those of you who are grammar geeks, and then I won't get too lost in this, I promise. I got the message, people don't want too much of this, but a little bit makes it fun. So a segolet noun in Hebrew is a noun where there are two segols, which are the three dotted vowel, eretz. And anytime that a segolet noun is right before a pause, either the semicolon, the etnachta, or a sof pasuk, the end of a sentence, it's changed to what we call in English, there's a different word in Hebrew, but in English it's called the pausal form. And eretz turns to aretz. So borei pri hagafen, gefen, which is a vineyard, is the segolet noun for grape, basically, or a vineyard. But when we say in the Kiddush, borei pri hagafen, we say gafen, not gefen. So that's just a little treat for those who love that stuff. So that's why sometimes I'll slip and say aretz instead of eretz, or eretz instead of aretz. It depends where in the sentence the noun is felt by how the vowels are said. Okay. So the one who sits in heaven, in other words, the contrast, Jeffrey, what this is saying, contrasted to the ones who are on earth in power and all they're interested in is consolidating power for themselves. The psalmist is saying, don't worry, they will not last. They are not forever. The one, or the power that is forever, is above it all, is not affected by wanting to grasp power and to not listen to those who are fighting for the unleashing of the power. So it's a contrast. So it's saying, Yoshev b'shamayim, the one who sits above it all. Now, yes, it's in masculine, but that's because Hebrew grammar has no choice. But we understand that it's not grammatically a male God with a big beard sitting up there. We want you to kind of exercise these muscles and to get away from a 12-year-old's idea of what God is and lose that and imagine the power in the universe. Yes, I can promise you that Trump will not last forever. I see somebody just said that, so yes. So, so he who sits in heaven, but the he, take that away. So a verse, let's look at verse 4. Can somebody give me other translations you have? For verse 4, what do you have? Other translations? He was enthroned in heaven, enthroned in heaven. That's a little steep. Let's see, we'll look at, but the one who sits in heaven, the one who sits in heaven. Okay, so the idea is the one who is in contrast and this we have a lot, the contrast between those who are In the song Shalom Aleichem, which we sing every Friday night, we call it Malchei Malachim, the King of Kings, meaning the one who is the ruler, the sovereign above all sovereigns. So the sense of what is eternal is different than that which is finite. Okay? So the one who is eternal will, Yitzchak will laugh, meaning is not affected. Adonai yil'ag lamon. Az yitaber elemo v'yipal uvchoromo yivhatlemu. But in his rage, he will terrify them. So here we have the God of anger, which is a lot of the reason, and we're going to contrast this psalm with another translation soon. One of the reasons that we see this big contrast between the Christian New Testament and the Jewish scripture. One of the things that the Christian New Testament talks a lot about is that the God of anger is replaced by a God of love. So I kind of reject that because I don't think all of the God of the Jewish scripture is a God of anger, but for sure there are some expressions of a lot of anger that we'll see. All right, I want, Harold, do you have any of the other translations available to you now? I should have told you, or I'm gonna.
You know what, Rabbi? Oh, I can't
Do it right now.
I can't my screen is stuck.
Okay, I want to see if I have this. I'm going to read something to you then. Hold on. Maybe tomorrow we'll look at Psalm 2 of the Fisher. Okay, Harold, are you on for tomorrow?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so let's look at Psalm 2 of Fisher, if anybody has that, but we'll look at that tomorrow. Because Fisher, remember, is the Zen-inspired. Is Jeffrey still here? So it'll be interesting to see how a Zen-inspired Buddhist monk handles these issues, okay? When we know that anger for Buddhism is one of the midot that they deal very carefully with. So I'm not going to look at that translation now. We'll look at that tomorrow and really carefully. Actually, I want to show you something about that right now. I'm going to read it to you, but we'll actually study it tomorrow. So let me read you the beginning of, this is the Norman Fisher Psalm 2. So remember the first, I'm going to go from the first verse to where we are now. What makes nations erupt and people's minds go wild? Wow, what a translation of that first verse, huh? So remember, what the King James says, why do the heathens rage? What makes nations erupt and people's mind go wild? So all of a sudden, does that start to mean something to you different? Okay, Harold's screen froze. Thank you, Harold, for letting us know. Sorry about that. What makes nations erupt and people's minds go wild? The heedless take counsel of the heedless. In their senselessness, they think to flee from you, and from authority only you confer, saying, let us break apart the ties and throw away the cords. You laugh at them. You hold them up in derision. You speak your anger for them, terrifying them in your confoundedness. Now, for those who are having difficulty with God's anger here, keep thinking, if you imagine the heedless or the Malchei Eretz, or the Hitlers, the Stalins, the Viktor Orbans, the dictators of the world. So maybe you'll think differently about God's anger, just to keep that shift. And again, I'll keep pushing you to try different, how shall we say, boy, talking about hair, my hair is sticking right up there. Okay. All right, you laugh at them, you hold them up in derision, you speak your anger for them, terrifying them in your confoundedness. Then the rest of Fisher's, for the next couple of paragraphs of his translation, they're in italics, meaning what? It is a speaker. So I'm going to read this to you and follow along in whatever translation you have. Jeffrey, you still with me? Great, thank you. I have ordained what is as it utterly is. On Zion, this mountain where you stand, announcing the order of things in clear words. That you are my children, repeatedly created as I am now, and that what you with rounded words pronounce, I will grant. The nations are for you only your immediate birthright you possess and are possessed by all and everywhere. And so you break oppression like a rod of iron is broken. You crush heedlessness as a potter's vessel is crushed underfoot. And you who think that flight from me is possible, that it is protection, advancement, power, take warning in these words. Recognize the sovereignty of what is. Recognize it with an awesome respect. Rejoice in it, but with care. Pay homage to it, but without greed. Let the unnameable consume you in the leaping flames of loneliness, disposition, and hatred. Happy are they who find their home in the kingdom of what is. Wow, huh? So we're going to look at that translation and the altered translation tomorrow in more detail. So maybe Harold will work on those if we can share those. But I'm going to stop now and open it up to questions or responses or anything on your mind. Anything in the chat? Babette, can you take over? Harold's screen is frozen. I'm going to look at the chat now also and see if there are questions here.
Yes, I'm here. Shep has his hand up.
Okay, Shep? You have to unmute yourself, Shep.
Okay. How do we do that? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. My own. Yeah, okay. You said about Geffen and Goffen.
Yep.
I understand among the Sephardic Jews, of which I am, that when they do the bracha, they say Borei Puri HaGeffen, and they don't say Goffen. Do you know why?
I do not know why, because this is biblical grammar. This is long before there were Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews, so I do not know why.
I think sometimes Sephardic Jews want to just be different.
Okay, I don't know. Bubala,
Really?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
I'll
We'll
find
have
out.
to ask somebody who's more of a scholar in Sephardic traditions.
Thanks.
I just don't know. But the biblical Hebrew is pretty clear, which predates.
Goffen.
So whenever it's called the pausal form, whenever it's before the et nachta or the sof pasuk, it changes from eretz to aretz or geffen to gafen. There are other verbs too. Sorry, don't know.
Thank you. Thanks.
Maybe it's just the way they're pronouncing it and it's not really what's written, but I don't know.
Ira Rosenblum has his hand up.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ira.
Great. So I have the Fisher version. That's the one that I've been using.
Yep, that's
And
this one.
I don't know if you mentioned it, that this is a Zen-inspired version of the Psalms, and you really get that sense of that in this one a lot. I mean, in some of the Psalms, you don't quite, I don't quite see it, but in this one, all the talk about people's minds going wild and being with what is it's so clearly Zen influence and Buddhist influence here, which made me think before when you were talking about like how seeing these Psalms through different lenses, and what, 1,000 years from now they'll look back at, his translation is sometimes so clearly seen through a lens that was not really part of the lens when these things were written, probably. I mean, I would assume, and it makes me wonder, just how far should translators be allowed to stray from the original
Well,
intent?
Ira, that is an excellent question, and I would say this about that. I wouldn't, and I talked about this last or a couple of weeks ago, can't remember when. Translation might be the wrong word, that it could be an adaptation, or as I keep saying, translation is a form of interpretation. And that's why I don't think he's wrong, by the way. I think anything that helps us get to dig underneath, to get closer to understand what the meaning is. There are different reasons to try and translate. One is to get at what the author meant, but as in poetry, what the author meant is not necessarily the end of the story, right? You could take a great poem and it could be so meaningful to you, but you have no idea if that's actually what the author meant, and it doesn't really matter. Art does not stop with the author's intent. Great art needs to have a life way beyond whatever was in the head of the author. They don't own it. Once an artist gives us a gift, the gift is the world, and it's a gift of God, really, I believe, and maybe even there's meaning in a poem that an author writes that they don't even know is there, that is there. Do you know what I mean? Even there can be things that another person can find that the author might say, wow, that's a revelation for me, and I agree. But I'm an originalist, not only because it's fun to go back and try and figure out, and I think because this is ancient, we have to go back to the Hebrew, and we have to go back to try and keep digging and digging and digging. But I approve of anybody taking a psalm and saying, how do I make this psalm meaningful to me? Which is why I am, and I'll continue encouraging everybody when we finish each psalm to try and write something that uses something from the psalm and make it meaningful to you. And I literally tell people, take each sentence and take this sentence and try and say it in a way that makes these words speak to you, because ultimately that's what psalms are about. But yes, I'll be looking at throughout the class Norman Fisher's book, which is called Zen-Inspired Translations of the Psalms. Stephen Mitchell, he doesn't even use the word translation. He says selected and adapted. He doesn't even pretend it's translation. But then Robert Alter, which we'll be looking at with the Alter and the Fisher, Alter really tries to find in English as close a way to express the biblical Hebrew, not by doing literal, but trying to get to the underlying rhythm, poetic alliteration, structure. And then there's the Nahum Sarna, which is a great commentary. But I don't think any of one of them has the answer. And I think that's what and some of the Psalms that some of you wrote based on Psalm 1, I think are revelations to me. I mean, and I've been saying and studying the Psalms, I'm 60 years old. I really started when I was 15 years old, having a deep relationship with the Psalms. So I can't do math, but that's since I was 15. And the Psalms that you all wrote based on Psalm 1, I learned something new about Psalm 1 from you. Do you know what I mean? So it's that, but I do believe in going back to the Hebrew and the Greek and working out each word. I love that. But then ultimately it's up to us to find our personal deep meaning.
Rabbi, I think we're almost at time.
Yeah.
Judy just said to me 4 questions. I got out and back in, so I don't have, Babette, do you have the 4 questions from Judy I forwarded to you? Can you put that on the screen? And we have I know that there are people with their hands up. I see Jeremy, David, Benjamin, and Shep. We're just not going to be able to get to you today. We will get to you.
Hold your questions for tomorrow. And tomorrow we're going to look at this Psalm, which I read, and we're going to look at altars. The problem with Fisher and with Mitchell is that they chose selectively Psalms to write. So we don't have a complete 150 Psalms from either of them. So Mitchell didn't do Psalm 2, for instance.
And Rabbi, our schedule for this week is today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, and then
Correct.
We're off on Thursday and Friday, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and just so that people are checking their email, I scanned another text, which is the very literal word-by-word interlinear, and sent it to everybody. I have sent everybody the altar. I'm going to be posting these things on a separate site where people can go and download text. And as I get the other translations, I will be scanning them and put them up too, so that everybody will have the same library.
And folks, please make sure you're checking the Facebook group that Harold has created, because there's been wonderful things posted there and great conversation happening during the afternoon of people posting either some of their own interpretations or questions. So the Facebook group continues all day long.
Okay.
Okay, so I have the 4 questions. I can share them now.
Great.
Thank you, Babette.
So hold on 1 second.
As Babette gets ready to share them, this is Judy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Rabbi. You can tell I'm getting serious about Passover here with the 4 questions about Kushiyot. And I know we have many, many more questions as we do each year, but maybe even a few extra this year. But let's start with the traditional ones and keep getting that Passover vibe happening for us. Babette, you'll be able to scroll it up a little bit more when we get a little farther down? Okay, great. Okay, everybody, keep yourself on mute, but sing out at your own homes. Oh, wrong one. Shebechol halelot anochi chametz matzah. Please mute. Chametz umatzah halayla hazeh כולו מצא. הלילה הזה, כולו מצא. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים שאר ירקות, שאר ירקות. הלילה הזה מרור. הלילה הזה מרור. שבכל הלילות אין אנו מטבילין אפילו פעם אחת, אפילו פעם אחת. הלילה הזה שתי פעמים. הלילה הזה שתי פעמים. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים בין יושבין ובין מסובין, בין יושבין ובין מסובין. הלילה הזה כולנו מסובין. הלילה הזה כולנו מסובין. Good time to take out your Haggadah. Go to the back, start at the beginning, either way, dust off some of those melodies, and enjoy as we come closer to Pesach Wednesday night. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow at 10. Wonderful to be studying with you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.